message for the Iraqi people. You will not have to fear the rule of Saddam Hussein ever again. In the history of Iraq, a dark and painful era is over. A hopeful day has arrived. All Iraqis can now come together and reject violence and build a new Iraq.
That, of course, President Bush earlier today with a message for the Iraqi people and for the world. Welcome to Washington and this special edition of Special Report. I'm Brit Hume. Saddam Hussein is in custody tonight. The former dictator was pulled out of a hole in the ground outside a farmhouse near Tikrit. It's the end of an enormous manhunt, the beginning of a new phase in the reconstruction of Iraq. Fox News correspondent Greg Palcott is standing by now in Tikrit with more details. Greg?
Hey, Brit, we're here at the 4th Infantry Division headquarters, what just happens to be an old palace of Saddam Hussein, and just happens to be about 10 miles from where Saddam Hussein was captured just last night. It happened at 8:30 local time, Iraqi time last night, but this was not an overnight thing. Officials tell us that months and months of intelligence gathering led to that capture. First, ex-Ba'ath, ex-regime figures, and then going to families and tribes linked to the ex-dictator. And in the last 24 hours before the capture, the tip leading the troops to the town of Al-Dur, about, as I said, 10 miles from here. 600 troops led by special forces. They went to 2 houses where they thought Saddam Hussein might be. He was not there. They saw 2 people running, and then they zeroed in on what they called a spider hole, really an underground passage. And that's where they found a bewildered, bearded Saddam Hussein lying with a pistol. But no fight, no injuries incurred. He was quickly sent to Baghdad, where he was proved to be, in fact, Saddam Hussein, thanks to a DNA test. Chief Civil Administrator Paul Bremer broke the news and expressed satisfaction.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him. This is a great day in Iraq's history. For decades, hundreds of thousands of you suffered at the hands of this cruel man. Those days are over forever.
The reaction in Baghdad, in fact, was celebratory for a lot of people who've been oppressed by the dictator for so long. Up here in Tikrit, a little bit more of a sullen reaction. There were some Saddam loyalists here, a sign of caution coming from the officers here that perhaps the anti-coalition fight will not be over. But in fact, the real important point here is, Brit, to talk about the 4th Infantry Division, folks. They've been out for 8 months hunting Saddam Hussein. We've been with them on several patrols, bone-jarring Humvee rides across the desert, wading through the swamp, sitting all night in the darkness, looking for Saddam Hussein, searching. These guys were a big part of the hunt for all of these months. These guys now can feel a real sense of satisfaction. Great.
Greg, what's the sense there about what impact this will have on the level of attacks on U.S. forces?
The hope is that it will reduce them. Certainly, there were indications that Saddam Hussein, although he didn't have any communications there to speak of, was having some linkage with some of the anti-coalition elements that were operating around the country, and that is the hope. But as I mentioned, there is caution, too, because there are other people here who are just against the U.S. being here, against for nationalism, and for other religious reasons will continue the fight. So a little bit of careful caution, but again, satisfaction, Brit.
All right, Greg, thanks very much. Saddam Hussein, as we've noted, was captured without a shot fired or even a struggle of any kind. He is described by Iraqis who have seen him as cooperative and talkative, but unrepentant. Fox News correspondent Major Garrett has more on the activities that led U.S. troops to that hole in the ground where he was hiding. Major?
Hello, Brit. As Greg just alluded to, U.S. forces have been searching for Saddam since the day the war began. Tantalizing bits of intelligence led U.S. forces down many cold trails. And Saddam's elusiveness and his apparent hand in attacks on coalition forces had begun to gnaw on senior U.S. military leaders and raise questions about the entire mission here at home. That all ended this weekend with very specific intelligence led to what might be best called the mother of all battlefield busts. The murderous dictator who terrified millions and built gilded palaces cowered here in a dirt hole 6 feet below the ground, listening apprehensively to the footfall of U.S. troops above.
He was just caught like a rat.
Saddam wore a pistol but didn't use it on U.S. forces or himself.
He was in the bottom of a hole, so there's no way he could fight back.
The mission, codenamed Red Dawn, began late Saturday morning Iraq time with a very specific tip that came from one of the family members close to Saddam.
Over the last 10 days or so, we brought in about 5 to 10 members of these families who then were able to give us even more information. And finally, we got the ultimate information from one of these individuals.
The location, Ad Adwar, 9 miles south of Saddam's hometown of Tikrit. 600 troops with the 4th Infantry Division cordoned off an area just over 1 mile square. A special operations team then searched without success 2 nondescript farmhouses codenamed Wolverine 1 and Wolverine 2.
Coalition forces subsequently found a suspicious location to the northwest of Wolverine 2. The area is a small walled compound with a metal lean-to structure, a mud hut, and during the search, a spider hole was detected.
A dirt tunnel that led to a dugout space with just enough room for a man to lie down. A small plastic pipe provided fresh air. Soldiers removed a rug, lifted a styrofoam ceiling, and found their ace in the hole.
There were no injuries, and in fact, not a single shot was fired.
Gaunt, bearded, bedraggled, Saddam said little to his U.S. captors.
A bit disoriented, obviously, as he came up, but that he was just very much bewildered, and then he was taken away.
U.S. forces flew Saddam to Baghdad and hauled him before other top regime captives and members of the Iraqi Governing Council.
Saddam Hussein, the captive, has been talkative and is being cooperative.
Saddam could have been a fugitive earlier. U.S. forces had been scouring areas around Tikrit for months, even this one.
We have been to this area before. We have been down this road before. That doesn't mean he's been there the whole time.
Senior military officials say Saddam's been a fugitive since Baghdad fell, traveling lightly and with little or no security.
I've said from the beginning, I believe he moves every 3 to 4 hours and very short notice, and I believe he moves probably to several locations such as this.
A dark, dirty, and glorious end to a dictator the U.S. military has dedicated years of effort to first isolate, then topple, and now capture. But it's far from the end of the road militarily.
The capture of Hussein only strengthens our resolve to continue the fight against those conducting anti-coalition activities and increases our commitment to help in the ongoing efforts to rebuild Iraq.
Amid the good news, one somber note. A U.S. soldier died today trying to disarm a bomb attached to a telephone pole to a town about 25 miles south of Baghdad. Now, this soldier was an explosives expert, but the bomb went off as he approached the telephone pole, suggesting it was remotely controlled. The soldier, who has not been identified by the Pentagon, the 452nd to die since the war began in Iraq, the 313th to die as a result of hostile action. Brit?
Major Garrett, thank you, sir. Next on Special Report, President Bush welcomes the news of Saddam Hussein's capture, but warns there are still dangers ahead in Iraq. Stay tuned. President Bush welcomed the news of Saddam's capture quietly with a subdued statement to this country and to the Iraqi people, and a word of caution that much work remains to be done in that country. Fox News senior White House correspondent Jim Angle reports.
President Bush went on national television to mark the capture, which officials call a defining moment in the future of Iraq.
The capture of this man was crucial to the rise of a free Iraq. It marks the end of the road for him and for all who bullied and killed in his name.
And now the president said the former dictator of Iraq will face the justice that he denied to millions of his countrymen.
I have a message for the Iraqi people. You will not have to fear the rule of Saddam Hussein ever again. All Iraqis who take the side of freedom have taken the winning side.
Mr. Bush also suggested that Saddam's supporters and cronies might want to take a look at the handwriting on the wall.
For the Ba'athist holdouts largely responsible for the current violence, there will be no return to the corrupt power and privilege they once held.
Saddam's capture, the president said, is the end of a dark and painful era. It's also been difficult for the United States, but the president argued that it was perseverance that brought us to this point.
We've come to this moment through patience and resolve and focused action. And that is our strategy moving forward.
The president started calling world leaders early this morning to personally convey the good news. The first call went to his closest ally, British Prime Minister Tony Blair, who later told Britons that the tiny minority who supported Saddam must now know their cause is futile, suggesting they should halt the violence and look to the future.
So this is a time for celebration, but it's also a time to look forward, to unify and to reconcile.
The German government congratulated the coalition on the arrest, saying Saddam will now face his just punishment.
I believe there now is a chance for violence to decrease, terror to come to a standstill, and the energetic reconstruction of the country.
And the foreign minister of France, the nation most active in opposing Saddam's ouster, declared his government delighted by Saddam's capture, saying the page of the dictatorship has now been turned.
We hope this arrest will break the violence. We hope that this situation will lead to the reconciliation of everybody. This is a necessary condition to allow the return of Iraqi sovereignty and the return of a real democracy.
And Spanish President Aznar said the time has come for Saddam to pay for his crimes. President Bush was careful in his speech to say that the capture of Saddam does not mean an end to the violence in Iraq, though officials do hope it will demonstrate to Saddam holdouts that they have no future. In any case, the president said the U.S. will not relent until they're defeated. Brit?
Jim, what about the president's, when did he learn of this? How did all that unfold yesterday?
Well, the president got a call at 3:15 p.m. yesterday afternoon at Camp David from Defense Secretary Rumsfeld, who began by cautioning the president that initial reports are often inaccurate. And the president interrupted him and said, sounds like this is going to be good news. And Rumsfeld went on to explain that the U.S. military in Iraq thought it had a man in its possession they believed to be Saddam Hussein. And the president said, that is good news. They went on to discuss the possibility it could be an imposter. Rumsfeld said that they were fairly certain that this was indeed Saddam Hussein. The president wanted to know why they were so confident. Secretary Rumsfeld couldn't give a good answer, so he called Baghdad and called the president right back to say that it was because of distinguishing characteristics on the man's body that convinced him it was Saddam. Even then, the president suggested they be cautious. They wanted to make absolutely sure. They did a number of other things, as you know now, to find out that it was indeed Saddam. At 5 a.m. Sunday morning Eastern Time, Ambassador Bremer called Condoleezza Rice to tell her that they had confirmed that it was indeed Saddam. And at 5:14 a.m., she called the president to let him know that Saddam Hussein had, in fact, been captured and was in U.S. custody. The most positive sign of progress in some time, and a very good sign for the future of Iraq. Brit?
Jim Angle, thank you very much. Next on Special Report, how they did it, what it took for the U.S. military to capture Saddam Hussein. We'll have two guests with some real experience in such matters. Stay tuned.
Him and just a couple other people with him, so he didn't really have much of a security force. And whenever you go in with overwhelming force, he knew, and he was in the bottom of a hole, so there's no way he could fight back, so he was just caught like a rat.
Caught like a rat. Joining me now for analysis of this are two Fox News military analysts. First, retired General of the Air Force Tom McInerney, and retired General of the Army Robert Scales, Bob Scales. Now, welcome to both of you. Let me start with you, Bob. This was described as a cordon and search operation. I've heard you describe such operations. The word flows off your tongue. What is such an operation?
This is just a miniature version of what the 3rd Infantry Division did around Baghdad. It's simply an operation where you establish a loose cordon around an area of interest, in this case...
A perimeter.
Yeah, about a 2-kilometer square goose egg of terrain. And you use vehicles like Bradleys and Apaches that have sensors that are able to spot troops as they try to move around in the dark, keep them from escaping. And then you take assault squads with Task Force 20 or members of the Brigade Recon Team or infantry soldiers.
Now these are 600 men.
600 men, but most of them are in the perimeter. And then a few others are part of the assault teams. And they go into the areas of interest. They find those points on the ground where Saddam is expected to be, and they conduct the search. The key with the cordon is by establishing that cordon, the bad guys can't escape. They're forced to go to ground, and that's what happened here, is that Saddam couldn't head for the boats, or he couldn't head for the villages in an adjacent village. He was forced to go to ground. And when a cordon and search is done right, that's exactly what's supposed to happen.
Now, it seems remarkable with all that, even though they were in the right place and had the right intelligence, that they actually found him. I mean, it couldn't have been easy to. I mean, you wonder how they spotted that. They knew this thing was there. I mean, it's covered up by a mat and so forth. It looks like a part of the basement, right?
Sure, but remember now, these guys have been at this now for what, many months, and they've come close several times. You know, there are two ways to find someone. You can use sort of the golden tip. Saddam's sons are at this location on this particular time, go get them. Or you can use this sort of intelligence fusion technique where through the use of smart intelligence work, good analysis, good intelligence fusion, you begin
What does intelligence fusion mean?
Fusion means that you take elements of information from many different sources, members of his bodyguard, members of his tribe and clan, his family members, and it's like putting together a piece of a puzzle. And you get to the point where geographically and in terms of time, you narrow it down into an ever smaller circle till you get to the point that you can
old information
saturate
is
it.
useful,
Absolutely.
New information is useful, patterns are useful.
Sure, and not only that, but once you get the pattern, then you go back to the people that you'd interviewed earlier, and then you take the new information and run it by them again. And eventually, you just narrow that area of interest down to where it's manageable, and that's what happened here.
People who saw George Tenet last night, he was out at a party at Secretary Rumsfeld's, found him in an extraordinarily high good humor, praising to the skies the CIA people that work for him. No one knew why at the time, or at least most people who were guests at this event didn't know why. I assume this had something to do with it.
Sure it did, and that's the whole point about fusion. Fusion takes all sources, CIA, DIA, technical intelligence, human intelligence, intelligence from within the unit and externally, and fuses it together to find those bits and pieces to pull out to be able, again, as I said, to narrow down that area of influence.
All right. Tom McInerney, looking at the big picture there, what meaning does this have for the continuing struggle to subdue the rebels, subdue the insurgents, and pacify the country?
I think it's huge, Brit. First of all, because...
That's not direct, of course. I mean, he obviously he wasn't running anything from his hidey hole.
That's correct, and I don't think he really was throughout because he didn't want any fingerprints for the fusion issue that Bob was just talking about. He didn't want any one of the intelligence sources going back to him. But the fact is, the reason it's huge is because television and the media have become the center of gravity of this war. We can't lose over there. We could have sent 6 people out there and gotten Saddam last night. So it's not the size of the force. The issue is...
Because he only had 2 people with him and he didn't put up a fight.
And that's correct. And most of the fights out there are all small unit. And so what has become the real issue is the media that they're displaying across the world, the Arab world, the United States. Our political season has tended to fuel it every day, and that's why you see an event every day and the cameras glom onto it. Now this has a huge impact on that media war, that center of gravity. There will still be, and I believe the next 30 or 60 days, still the daily event. You've just got to count on it. There'll be an American killed every day, and as unfortunate it is, and they're still trying to captivate it. But the fact is those people in Iraq, those people that had hopes, those Baathists, those Sunnis that had hopes that he would come back, that is gone now. Now we've got to cut a deal with the Sunnis and get them to be part of it. And the biggest thing I think is number one, we've got to get jobs, and number two, we've got to Iraqi-ize this. We have got to get the Iraqi support, military, government up and running so they take it, and we bring our force down, and we don't talk an occupation. And so I don't believe we can move those forces out fast enough, frankly. I mean, prudently, but...
You mean militarily it's better when there are fewer of us in there?
That's correct.
You agree with that, General?
Absolutely right. The 2 I's. Improve your intelligence and Iraqify the country. If you can do those 2 things over time, such that you can find the enemy, the idea of
When you do that, what do you leave behind? Special operations teams?
Oh, sure. and good intelligence behind. You leave behind the eyes, that unblinking eye over the battlefield, so that as you pull troops out and you replace them with Iraqis, you still maintain a sense of the pulse of that country, of the military operation. But the sooner you put an Iraqi face on every street corner, the sooner you're going to be able to restore security to that area.
Even lightly trained, as they seem to be, briefly trained, some of them deserting the army, such as it is. Yeah. That doesn't make you think you can...
No, because the issue we're faced with is not an offensive army. The issue is not a maneuver army. It's really a constabulary at best, or a strong police force.
Guard duty.
Guard duty.
Yeah.
And they do need intelligence, as Bob said, and we're going to have to build up a police force, an FBI equivalent, that can go out and has that intelligence. They have got to be part of this.
One last quick question, very quick. Any chance Saddam will give up much information?
I think he will. The guy's a coward, and I think eventually he's going to try to save his own
I think he will, and if I was the French, Germans, and Russians, I'd be concerned.
Got to take a break for headlines here, but we'll be right back after that. Stay tuned.
Just got all my shopping done.
Great.
Do. Jingle bells.
No, it was good.
I was in choir.
The holidays are here. Dash through your list today at Circuit City. Save $20 on this Olympus 3.2 megapixel digital camera. Just $229.99 after mail-in rebate. Save on great gifts in every department. Circuit City, we're with you.
Well, I think you look great.
This year, the holidays are Gateways, so give the box. Inside, you'll find the season's hottest gifts. For a limited time, get a free Gateway 5-megapixel digital camera with the purchase of select PCs, like our M675, which features an Intel Pentium 4 processor with HD technology. Act now and get free shipping with delivery by Christmas. We also have great desktops starting under $500. So hurry in, give the box.
Buonasera, signore. Benvenuti. Today, we have some wonderful specials. First, a fresh angel hair pasta with a homemade tomato sauce. So sure to give you heartburn, you'll never forget.
It's different for people with acid reflux disease.
On top of that exquisite pain, acid gonna churn up your stomach and could grate away the lining of your esophagus just like it would a Parmesan cheese.
You should ask your doctor about the purple pill called Nexium.
You could be up all night.
For many people, with one prescription Nexium daily, heartburn goes away and stays away.
Tossing and turning.
And Nexium actually heals acid reflux erosions in the esophagus. Other serious stomach conditions may still exist. Talk to your doctor. Nexium has a low occurrence of side effects, including headache, diarrhea, and abdominal pain. Call this number for more information and a Nexium free trial offer. Don't let acid reflux eat at you.
How does that sound?
Relief, healing, Nexium.
Tonight, hundreds of thousands of you suffered at the hands of this cruel man. Those days are over forever. The tyrant is a prisoner.
Saddam Hussein captured by U.S. forces. For breaking news, updates, and live reports from the region, stay with Fox News Channel for continuing coverage. Tonight, it's special coverage. At 9, Shepard Smith hosts the capture of Saddam Hussein. At 10, Watch at Large with Geraldo Rivera. Then at 11, catch a special edition of the O'Reilly Factor.
Hello, everybody. I'm Paige Hopkins. President Bush enjoying holiday festivities tonight after this incredibly historic day. The President and First Lady attending a Christmas concert at the National Building Museum in Washington. The annual event is sponsored by TNT for the benefit of the Children's National Medical Center. Overseas, a U.S. envoy has arranged a three-way meeting tomorrow with hopes of getting the Israelis and Palestinians back on the roadmap to peace. Both Israeli and Palestinian negotiators confirm the meeting will take place, but there's no word on exactly who will attend. State Department envoy David Satterfield is urging the two sides to resume peace talks. The search for missing college student Drew Shadeen spanning 2 states and 800 square miles this weekend. But sheriffs in North Dakota say there probably won't be any more wide-scale searches after this. Divers drilled through ice on rivers in Grand Forks as searchers sifted through snowy fields on foot. 22-year-old Shadeen has been missing since November 22nd. Another helping of snow for people along the East Coast from Washington, D.C. to Maine. For the second straight weekend, people in New York City are breaking out their shovels. The same system left about 9 inches on the ground in Kansas. A special edition of the Fox Report with Shepard Smith is at the top of the hour. Special Report with Brit Hume continues right now. That's here on the Fox News Channel, the network America trusts for fair and balanced news. We report, you decide on Fox.
The capture of Saddam Hussein will certainly have implications for the Democratic presidential candidates. How are they reacting? And will the good news make it even more difficult for one of them to challenge the president in 2004? Fox News chief political correspondent Carl Cameron standing by now with more on this You Decide 2004 report. Carl?
Hi, Britt. Well, the candidates were spread all over the country, indeed all over the world today, and they all hailed the capture of Saddam Hussein as an opportunity that they said the Bush administration should seize to internationalize the reconstruction of Iraq. But they also recognize that this is a major boost for President Bush. Anti-war candidate Howard Dean got hammered by his rivals for saying back when Baghdad fell that he merely, quote, supposed that it would be positive. But today, Dean actually offered among the most gracious congratulations to the president.
This is a great day of pride in the American military, a great day for the Iraqis, and a great day for the American people. And frankly, a great day for the administration. I think President Bush deserves a day of celebration. We have our policy differences, but we won't be discussing those today. I think he deserves a day to celebrate as well.
It's a magnificent opportunity for the President of the United States to shift gears and reduce the burden for America. Incidentally, you know, Governor Dean and some other people didn't even think it was great. They didn't even know that it was good to get rid of Saddam Hussein.
If Howard Dean had his way, Saddam Hussein would still be in power today, not in prison. And the world would be a much more dangerous place.
This is a very important development, but we got a long way to go. And I've been saying for a long time, and I say today, the president still needs to get the help that we need in bringing this matter to a successful conclusion.
We've been due some good news, and this is good news, and I hope that this will see a diminution in the violence directed against the American soldiers.
Clark was actually in the Netherlands, where he's set to testify at former Yugoslavian leader Milosevic, Slobodan Milosevic's trial at The Hague. With Saddam off the streets, Democrats have one less huge thing to attack the Bush administration about, and already some of the Democratic candidates are beginning to treat the Bush administration's success as a potential sign of more of Howard Dean's potential vulnerability. They're once again attacking Dean for opposing the war. Add in some of the steadily improving economic numbers, and the Bush administration has got to be feeling somewhere between cautiously optimistic and downright terrific about how things are going right now, Brett.
Carl Cameron, thank you very much. The capture of Saddam Hussein was greeted with joy around the world, but it seems to come as unwelcome news in some parts of the Arab world, especially to some Palestinians. Fox News correspondent Jennifer Griffin standing by now with that report from Jerusalem. Jennifer?
Hi, Brit. Well, the reaction across the Arab world stood in stark contrast to the reaction in Europe, where you saw prime minister after prime minister coming out and praising the capture of Saddam Hussein. It's notable, Brit, that no Arab head of state actually came out and made public comments other than the Secretary of the Arab League, Amr Moussa. What this says is that these Arab leaders are, in fact, possibly scared of the reaction from their own people. For instance, Brit, it's notable that the Palestinians until today still looked up to Saddam Hussein for standing up to America and for launching Scud missiles at Israel in 1991. These are old pictures of old rallies from earlier this year, but many Palestinians thought of Saddam Hussein as the modern-day Salah ad-Din, who in the 12th century, of course, pushed the Crusaders out of the Middle East. Now, among Palestinians, Saddam really bought his popularity, Brit. He sent $35 million over 2.5 years to the families of Palestinian suicide bombers until, of course, the war in Iraq began, $10,000 to anyone who died fighting Israel, and $25,000 to suicide bombers. The Israeli Prime Minister called President Bush personally to congratulate him.
We are relieved that this murderer and dictator can no longer stand in the way of the rebuilding and reconstruction
of the country he destroyed. I congratulated the President on his firm and courageous stand against global terror. We believe that the entire non-democratic world, especially those engaged in terror, will learn from this lesson.
But what effect, Brit, if any, will Saddam's capture have on other fighting groups in the region, especially on the Palestinians fighting here? It's still not clear. Now, a few days ago, we were in the West Bank, in Nablus, with the Al-Aqsa brigades. Today, I spoke with them by phone, and they say they'll keep fighting. We also spoke to the leader of Hamas in Gaza, who was angry Saddam didn't put up a fight.
We were shocked. We assumed he would resist until death. It is shameful for a leader who ruled the Iraqi people for 35 years not to resist.
It seems that the man which is captured today is not leading the resistance, so the Iraqi resistance will be continued.
Now, Brit, the Islamic Jihad leader was basically saying that there would be still more suicide bombings against American forces in Iraq. It's notable that the Hamas leader expressed disgust when we interviewed him via satellite link to Gaza today. He said with all the encouragement that Saddam Hussein gave to Palestinians to blow themselves up against Israelis and for others in Iraq to blow themselves up against Americans, it was, as he said, disgusting to see him give up to the Americans without a fight. Brit?
Well, you do have to ask the question, Jennifer, don't you, as to whether that reaction will not be felt just as well by the people in Baghdad or people in Iraq who have been able to run these suicide missions and get people to kill themselves. It would seem, at least on the face of it, and particularly backed up by that Hamas reaction, that they might have some trouble with that.
Well, I think over time, Brit, you're going to see it more difficult to recruit people for these missions if you see people like Saddam Hussein looking so weak and pathetic, and that's the kind of reaction we heard from Arabs and from Palestinians today. But I think what you might see in the coming days is an upsurge in these kind of attacks, especially here in the Israeli areas, because the Palestinian groups want to say, hey, we're still here. Even if Saddam gave up, we're still continuing our fight. Brit?
All right, Jennifer Griffin, thank you. Next on Special Report, what will the capture of Saddam Hussein do to the balance of power in the Middle East? Former Middle East Ambassador Dennis Ross will be here with some answers to those questions. Stay tuned.
Now is the time for all Iraqis, Arabs and Kurds, Sunnis, Shia, Christian, and Turkoman, to build a prosperous, democratic Iraq at peace with itself and with its neighbors.
But will it? The certain knowledge that Saddam Hussein is out of power and behind bars obviously has repercussions throughout that whole region there, and I'm joined now by former Mideast envoy Dennis Ross, Mideast envoy to 2 presidents, for a closer look at how the impact of the capture is likely to play out. Dennis, welcome. Nice to have you. So what is your first sense? First of all, I heard that Jennifer mentioned that the Secretary General of the Arab League was the only leader to comment publicly. What basically did he say?
He welcomed this. He said it's an important development for Iraq. It was the basis on which to create a new Iraq. So he said what I think we should have heard Arab leaders say. But the fact that we haven't heard a single Arab leader say anything speaks volumes about their own uncertainty about how their own publics are going to react, their own recognition that there's probably a sense of further humiliation within the Arab world, and they don't want to look like they're somehow crowing at this moment.
Well, that is striking, isn't it? Because none of those leaders you're speaking of is elected. They presumably hold absolute power, and yet they're afraid to speak for fear of public reaction. That seems paradoxical to me.
Well, at a time like this, when there's a kind of shock effect, the one thing they don't want to do is appear like they're on the wrong side of where that shock is coming from. Bear in mind, they may not have elections there, but they fear their publics. They fear spontaneity. They fear that, in fact, you could see some kind of mobilization of passions that could be turned against them. So they are very careful in a circumstance like this.
What's your sense of the effect, though, in terms of Bush administration diplomacy, Middle East diplomacy, all of that? Is this a leg up, or is this important in that respect? And
Yes.
what about Iraq?
Yes. Well, let's take it one at a time. In the case of Iraq, we should not expect that suddenly the insurgency is going to disappear. And part of the reason for that is that you still have a certain reality that Sunnis feel the new order is going to put them at a disadvantage. Somehow we have to find a way to reach out to Sunnis on the one hand to make it clear you can be a part of this new Iraq. You don't have to suffer from it. You're not going to dominate, but you're not going to suffer from it. But there should be an undercurrent to that as well, which says at the same time, if you're not prepared to be a part of it, you will pay the price. In the broader Arab world, I think this is a time to highlight the realities, not the myths, but the realities. It's time to adjust to reality. It's time to stop chasing false prophets.
Such as?
Such as the false prophets of Saddam Hussein.
Right.
The reality of making peace and not perpetuating conflict in the area. The reality of helping the new Iraq emerge.
And the making of conflict in the area is built upon the idea that someday the United States can be chased out of the region, Israel can be chased into the sea, Palestine restored to whatever they believe that it was. These are the myths you're referring to?
Absolutely. I mean, what you have is, in this part of the world for too long, there has been an embrace of mythologies and a reluctance to embrace reality. In the case of Iraq, Iraq can become a model for everyone else. Iraq can be not so much a Jeffersonian democracy. That's not in the cards right away. You got to build civil institutions first. You got to build a rule of law, an independent judiciary. You got to create a government there that can be decent towards its own people first and foremost. Now, if that happens, it becomes a source of inspiration to reformers who are emerging throughout the region. There's no question about that. But I was just out in the area, and one of the things I was struck by is many of the reformers understand the importance for themselves of creating a new Middle East, because their threat is the Islamicists. And for them to have their own salvation, they need reform, they need a rule of law, they need an end of corruption, they need participation and inclusion with the governments. Now, at the same time, many of them will fall back on slogans from the past because they're so habituated to think that way. You have a moment right now that you can begin to build on. I think it's very important for the Bush administration to continue to maintain its theme of supporting democratization. It's very important for the Bush administration to make it very clear that we will do what is necessary to succeed within Iraq, and what happened today will affirm that notion at a time when it was being questioned by many in the area.
Let me ask you about two countries in particular. First, Iran. What effect from this?
I think, talk about people having ambivalency, they will be among the foremost being quite happy about Saddam being gone. I mean, he inflicted a lot of punishment on Iran. On the other hand, if they think America is going to be triumphant, then it begins to make them uneasy. So I think here is a point where...
You're just talking about the mullahs, though, right? I mean, the reigning clerics.
That's right. The regime.
Iraqi and the Iranian people are a different story, wouldn't you
agree? I think the Iranian people could see that, you know, the future suggests that things can get better. I think they've begun to lose faith in the whole reform movement because Khatami, the president of Iran, hasn't delivered. I think there was a potential for greater radicalization and probably some fragmentation there. I think right now, this can be a source of I think, some support, inspiration to them as well.
What about Syria? Troublemaker.
Well, I think Syria would be wise to read the handwriting on the wall. I mean, one of the things I think we should be thinking about is moving as quickly as we can to a trial in Iraq by the Iraqis. So this is very clearly, this is the Iraqi people against Saddam, but not just Saddam, it should be the whole Ba'ath regime. If you want to have an effect on Syria, make it clear this is about all the crimes of the Ba'ath regime, because that will have a message for the Syrians as well.
Because that's a Ba'athist regime there.
That's right.
It's a different one, of course.
That's right.
Now,
but they will understand that it could have implications for them as well.
Is it your sense that the Iraqi judiciary in its current state is capable of such a thing, a trial like this?
Relatively soon, but here again you come back to what is the fundamental watchword, security. I mean, the sooner we can establish security on the ground there, the sooner you're going to be able to see a more normal life emerge, the sooner you'll see a rule of law that means something, and it sends a message to everybody else in the region.
One would think that in the days ahead it might be hard to convince anybody to commit suicide to revive the old regime after Saddam went without a shot, wouldn't you think?
Well, that's certainly the case. That is certainly the case. But bear in mind, again, you have an insurgency here that wasn't driven by him, but he was a symbol. And it was, as long as he was around, he conjured up fears. It made it difficult for the public to think about cooperating with us. Insurgencies are defeated when the local publics either fight them or are certain not to be apathetic.
Or they lose hope.
Or they lose hope. Now, what happened in this particular case is one where the reason to be fearful may begin to change.
Good. Dennis Ross, great to have you, as always. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Next on Special Report, Democrat Howard Dean says President Bush deserves a day to celebrate. But we'll hear what John Kerry said and others. We'll talk about that with our panel next.
This is a real opportunity to internationalize the effort in Iraq and reach out to the United Nations again, to NATO, to other countries, to bring in troops from other countries to replace our troops so that we may begin to bring ours home.
This is a great opportunity for this president to get it right for the long term, and I hope he will be magnanimous, reach out to the UN, to allies who've stood away from us, and use this as a moment to transform the entire operation in Iraq.
Well, that gives you a sense of it. It sounded as from those two pieces of